Hi there. Today we are jumping into the documents of the Notice of No Agency and the One-Time Showing. You may wonder what these documents are used for. There's a couple of different scenarios. I'm gonna explain the most popular way that we utilize these forms. That would be if you have a buyer and you are approaching a for sale by owner property. So when that happens, you would find the for sale by owner maybe from a sign in the yard, maybe they've advertised on Zillow. However it comes about, that seller is not represented by an agent, but you're wanting to bring your buyer into that home. And so you have to have that agency discussion with the seller prior to entering the home with your buyer. And we've got to have some information established prior to that. So one of the forms you utilize is the Notice of No Agency. Let's have a look at this form. So the Notice of No Agency relationship, you would put your name as the name of the licensee on the top line. The name of the sponsoring brokerage company would be Keller Williams Marquis, and then the property address obviously would be the house you're showing. You would mark this box, Notice of No Agency relationship, and then on this line, it's a little confusing, I know. There's examples here in the parentheses. Thank you for giving licensee the opportunity to, and then you insert a description of your work. In other words, showing the property of a FSBO. You could say showing the property and presenting an offer of a FSBO if your client decides to offer. But obviously, this form needs to be signed prior to you entering the house. You need to have this agency discussion with the seller. And so you don't know really if you're writing the offer at that point, right? So if it just says showing property, that's fine, but you do want to establish that there's no future relationship established. So you could put something there like, and facilitating purchase documents if the buyer is interested in pursuing the property. That's a lot to say on one line, right? So initially you could just say showing the property of the FSBO. Once you have that filled out, then you sign and you date it and you present it to the seller. If you're approaching the property and you have this form and you've had this discussion with the seller and the seller refuses to sign it, that's okay. Make sure you take 2 copies with you. You sign them both, date them both, give one to the seller, keep one for yourself in your file. That way you've got a record of it. The seller's signature is optional, but of course we would like to have their signature on this because it verifies that yes, you did in fact have this conversation. You can also present this document to the seller electronically prior to showing the property. So that's a viable option and one that a lot of agents do utilize. So you would complete this form and get have the conversation with the seller, get their email address, and then present the form to them through DocuSign. They would sign it and it would return to you. Then we for sure have the signature and the date and time stamp to signify that you did in fact have this agency discussion prior to showing the property. So you have this no agency form signed by you and hopefully by the seller. The importance of that again is to establish that you are not representing that seller. So you have no agency relationship and no agency responsibilities in accordance with anything you communicate with them. So then the other form that you want to present to a for sale by owner prior to showing the property is the one-time showing agreement to show the property to a prospective purchaser. So again, that notice of no agency is required as an attachment to this document. So you have to have that discussion about agency. All right, so when you present this one-time showing agreement, you have the property address here, Keller Williams Marquis here, and then it says we hereby grant the above agency and the broker. It would be your name here, permission to show the above property and authorize you to quote a price of blank. So this is why, again, you need to speak with the seller prior to showing the property, because you want to verify the purchase price or the sale price that they are advertising or they're hoping to get for the house. So that price has to be established by that seller. Then the next paragraph says, if the seller agrees to sell to the buyer blank percent commission of the total sale price or a minimum commission of blank will be payable to the sponsoring broker at the time of closing this transaction. So this is a discussion with that seller as to how much commission they would be willing to pay you as a buyer's agent. Now, we can't price fix. We've had that discussion. But you are absolutely worth your wages. And if you have a buyer's agreement in place, you definitely, in protection of your buyer, would want to request at least the commission amount that you have in that buyer's agreement, right? So say you put 2.5% or 2.7% on your buyer's agreement for your buyer to cover the cost if that percentage isn't reached in the purchase of their property. Then on this form, you would want to enter in that 2.5 or 2.7%, at least, at bare minimum, to, again, cover the expenses of your buyer. Now, your buyer could choose to bring whatever additional, if, say the seller said, no, I'm only paying 2%. That's a conversation between you and your buyer and the buyer's lender, if the buyer can and would make up the difference for whatever's on their buyer's agency agreement and whatever this seller is agreeing to pay out. So again, in protection of your buyer, you would want this number to reflect whatever the percentage is on the buyer's agency agreement form, buyer's representation agreement form, as a bare minimum, if possible. Minimum commission, typically, if the property is, under $50,000, then you may need to put a dollar amount here as the minimum commission. If it's over that and this is the commission that's being paid out, then you can put n/a or dashes or X's here that blank doesn't apply then, because this is sufficient for whatever. Or you can just repeat the percentage. If this is 2.5%, then you would put 2.5% here. Whichever you and your client are most comfortable with. And then, of course, you and your first sale by owner, whom you don't represent, whatever they are comfortable with. In agreement, all parties in agreement. So the next paragraph, it is understood and agreed that should this property be sold to the prospective buyer below or anyone acting on their behalf within blank months from the date below, the seller will agree to pay the sponsoring broker the commission set forth above. So the number of months here is, again, a term that you and the seller would agree upon, and the owner of the property. And so typically, in protection of your buyer, you would want a minimum of 3 months there. And that's just because anything can kind of go haywire, in a purchase contract, inspections, appraisal, just to protect the timeline. If it's an FHA or VA loan, or if there's a grant involved, sometimes that can take 6, maybe 8 weeks to close, depending on the market activity. So if you put 3 months in there, that gives a month cushion for any other surprises that may come up. It may be that, I don't know, a special scenario. I have put 4 months in that blank. You may put 6 months in that blank. It may be that the buyer's just starting their search and maybe they're not ready to offer. And so you want to protect yourself and your client, and so you put 6 months in there. Totally fine with that, as so long as the seller, the owner of the property, agrees to that term. So that's something that can be negotiated there. So at the bottom, you put the buyer's name. The owner or the seller of the property would sign here and here. Then you sign as the broker, and then I sign as the designated managing broker. The form is dated, and that completes the one-time showing disclosure, one-time showing agreement. So those are the documents you would use for a for sale by owner. The no agency form, I'm going to flip back up to that real quick. The no agency form, some other times that is utilized is if you are the owner of the property, then you would not be representing the buyer of the property. So either the buyer has their own agent, but if they don't and they've come to you for you to do the paperwork, then you need to sign that notice of no agency for the buyer. Because as a property owner and you're selling that property, you cannot represent the buyer. The state of Illinois does not allow that. So that would be another time that you would use this notice of no agency relationship. If you have any questions, you know who to call. Make it a great day.